Neither will me. Kia ora.
Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The government has made the Christchurch rebuild a top priority, and it says that the domestic construction boom will be centred on the $30 billion Christchurch rebuild. It will use it as a generator of economic activity, while at the same time using the Canterbury earthquakes as a reason for the economic hole we are in. But only a few days ago, 2 years after the earthquake, the government has finally announced a new apprenticeship scheme. The $30 billion cost of the Christchurch rebuild will be a huge economic stimulus for employment in building and construction, and it is no exaggeration that the success of the rebuild and New Zealand's economic future will be closely aligned. But we cannot afford for this opportunity to be squandered by political mismanagement. The government has been slow off the mark on issues which were obvious soon after the earthquakes. A case, I think, of too little, too late. After 2 years of policy stagnation, growing unemployment and mass exodus of workers overseas, the Christchurch rebuild is set only to accelerate from mid-2013. The first lot of apprentices finishing the government's newly announced apprentice scheme will come onto the market 3 years too late. Far too late. The opportunity has passed for the scale of employment benefits which might have been achieved. Why did the government not act a lot sooner? In 2012, unemployment numbers escalated to 175,000, especially in youth unemployment, where the apprentice scheme could have soaked up some of those numbers. The mass exodus over the last 2 years includes 9,000 Kiwi tradesmen, mostly to better work opportunities in Australia. Over the same period, 6,000 migrant tradesmen have arrived, leaving still a shortfall of 3,000. Temporary migrant work visas present associated problems: lax background checks, recruitment agency scams, overstayers, guest workers with no commitment to New Zealand, and their earnings go offshore. Kiwi workers should not have to compete with guest workers who undercut wages, downgrade work conditions, and they compete with workers from low-wage economies, adding only to the exodus to Australia. Over 12,000 temporary migrant work visas were granted for the last year for the Christchurch rebuild, mostly from Britain, Ireland and the Philippines. Recruitment packages included airfares, financial services, accommodation, a buddy system and monthly social events and so on. None of this was afforded to Kiwi workers. Only this week has the government announced the Canterbury Skills Employment Hub to strengthen labour market testing for guest workers. Again, too little, far too late. Kiwi workers should always have been at the forefront of the queue. Why did it take 2 years for the government to act? And given the government's poor record on visa control, what confidence can there be that the government's new initiatives are robust enough to combat endless migration scams? Also, what new structures and resources are being put in place to ensure that the $30 billion injection into the economy should advance Kiwi employment and not migrant guest workers? Last year, 138,000 guest workers were granted visas to work in New Zealand with no labour market testing, and the result, many jobs were lost to Kiwi workers. Mr Speaker, I want to go on to make some comments about the red zone policy for Christchurch, which I think has been a bit of a disaster, and the government can no longer sustain some of its shoddy policy making over those decisions. In New Zealand, it has always been accepted that if the government compulsorily takes land, especially residential land, then it must pay the fair market price for that land. Secondly, it is a matter of simple fairness that the government will not take advantage of disaster situations to acquire land at fair value. For practical reasons, using the last rating value was acceptable, but it should have been a starting point only. In Christchurch 2007 and Kaiapoi 2008 values were already out of date in 2010. Rating values are far too inaccurate to be unfair. So the government's first mistake was not to allow a challenge to rating values where they were not a fair assessment of property value. That was especially unfair where significant improvements had been made since the date of the valuations. If that was bad enough, consider the plight of people who had bare sections or uninsured homes on red-zoned flat land. The government's offer was only 50% of the rating value for the section. Mr. Speaker, that is outrageous, effectively a legalised fraud because of the circumstances. These people could not sell their land except to the government and could not build a house or live there. A red-zoned bare section owner would get only 50% for the section when a next-door neighbour would get 100%. That is illogical, inexplicable, unfair and an abuse of power by this government. Jerry Brownlee said that it was justified because there would have been land damage. That's poppycock. There was land damage for both bare sections and those with homes built on them. He also said that 50% was fair and that he would not reconsider. Well, he should reconsider. Now that it has been revealed that government officials had advised the minister to give bare section owners and uninsured homeowners the same treatment as insured homeowners. That is 100% of the land value. And, Mr. Speaker, the minister dumped that advice and substituted his own guess of 50% of the land value. And that, in my view, is a substantial abuse of power. Commercial landowners in the red zone have been similarly badly treated. Finally, the performance of government agencies involved in the recovery has been lacklustre. EQC is taking far too long to repair homes. Insurance companies are also taking far too long, and the minister has failed to do what he said he would do to get the insurers moving on the repair and building and rebuilding of homes. And the use by EQC of only one project manager, Fletcher's, has been another bad mistake. They do not have any competition and can virtually do what they like. And the central city rebuilding is also taking far too long. Demolitions after 2 years are still incomplete. And, Mr. Speaker, over the whole city, basic infrastructure repairs are far from finished. It seems that the lowest priorities in the West are getting first attention. And roads and other horizontal infrastructure are still left with only temporary repairs, if that, in the east of the city. The end result has been a litany of bad policy making by the government and substandard and desperately slow and inadequate performance by agencies. Mr. Speaker, the government has already failed on the Christchurch rebuild as one of its top priorities. I'd give it barely 3 out of 10. Not even a pass rate. It's made a mess of it. It needs to change gear and get the recovery going.
Thank you. The Honourable Dr. John.